Well, lawmakers in Oklahoma are the latest group to pass a measure restricting abortion access. We've seen similar efforts across the country as the Supreme Court considers a case that challenges Roe v. Wade. Jan Crawford is in Washington with more. Jan.
Well, I mean, here, I think Oklahoma is really making a statement. If it's up to some lawmakers, there won't be any abortions in the state, and it looks like they could well make that happen. The bill that passed yesterday bans abortions after cardiac activity is detected, which is usually around 6 weeks. But in addition, lawmakers are also on the way to approving another new law that would ban all abortions except for rape, incest, and medical emergencies. Both laws would allow private citizens to sue abortion providers for $10,000 rewards. They're modeled after a Texas law that bans abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected and gives private citizens the right to enforce it. Now, that Texas law is in place while these challenges are working their way through the courts, and I think the Oklahoma law would be treated the same. And the governor said he would sign any anti-abortion bill that the legislature sends him. And once signed, these laws would take effect immediately, which of course would not only restrict abortion access for women in Oklahoma, but for those Texas women who've been driving to the state for procedures. But like you said, I mean, it's important to point out Oklahoma is not alone. A growing number of states are passing these restrictive abortion laws. Some would take effect immediately. Others would take effect if the court overturns Roe. And we expect a decision in that case by the end of June. Emery?
All right, Jan, thank you so much for that overview. Appreciate it. So with more on the bill now, we want to bring in Jennifer Holland. She's an associate professor of history at the University of Oklahoma, joining us now. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So this bill is similar to the Texas bill in that it requires civilian enforcement. That's kind of like what made the Texas bill different. You know, anyone from, at least with the Texas bill, you don't have to actually live in the state to lodge a complaint. Anyone can do it. But I'm curious about how this bill is being received in Oklahoma, considering it depends on regular people to enforce it.
Yeah, well, I think that it happened so recently, and it really wasn't a surprise. So I think that, for example, the 4 clinics that provide abortions here have been preparing for this, and then of course the post-Roe world that will likely greet us all after June. And so I think that there are people who sort of are discouraged but also not surprised. And then of course there's a huge number of both citizens and legislators who are enthused that they were able to stake their claim this way and say that they are in fact perhaps the vanguard, right, of states in terms of the anti-abortion movement.
Mm-hmm. So as you sort of just pointed out, there are a number of states that have been introducing bills that will either challenge Roe v. Wade, or should Roe v. Wade be struck down or limited, could go into effect right away. And these are bills limiting abortion access. I'm curious about the way the argument in favor of these sort of bills has evolved over time. You know, what were we hearing, I don't know, for example, 50 years ago versus what we're hearing now, and we're seeing such an uptick in these sorts of bills?
Yeah, well, in some ways, the arguments haven't changed, but the power of the people making them has grown immensely over time, and it's certainly gotten more legislators who are willing to put these ideas into law. So you might imagine that these arguments would be religious because the movement is made up of religious people. But the arguments from very early on were not religiously oriented. They immediately cast themselves in the tradition of American rights campaign. So they compared Roe versus Wade to Dred Scott very quickly. The 1957 decision that said slaves were not Black people, both slaves and free weren't citizens. And they said this is a justice campaign. And you could hear that on the few legislators who spoke yesterday said that this is a movement that is for justice for all. And so they very much cast themselves in the tradition of increasing rights in America at the same time as they build on the power of conservative movements at the end of the 20th century and the 21st. They've developed other rhetorics, especially the idea that women are harmed by abortion in the last 20, 30 years. But that has really been a through line throughout, and we can see that in this bill, in this moment.
Do you think that part of that, the effect of that, is that it makes the argument for these bills perhaps more palatable to people who either may not be that interested because it's not their primary, issue when it comes to voting, or people who are uncomfortable with it. It makes them feel a little more comfortable.
Yes, I think it makes them feel more comfortable. And I also think it's galvanized young people who really want to be a part of a movement that feels like it's moving for justice and for more rights. And so you have people who really cast themselves as progressives in some way, and yet their way of articulating that progressiveness is through the anti-abortion campaign. I don't think it's been, I think this campaign has always worked alongside the fact that huge majorities of people who can get pregnant, or huge numbers of people who can get pregnant do get abortions over the course of their lives. So this isn't palatable to everybody, right? That people are still accessing this medical procedure, but it has made it more palatable and has made it feel urgent to talk about this as a civil rights campaign, and as a genocide that's happening, right? That needs to be shut down.
Fascinating. Jennifer, we could keep this conversation going, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much.